At 57, Nicole Kidman stands like a straight-up cathedral of light built over fault lines. Folks see the poise, the polish, the Oscar shine that glows like armor. But under that glow is a woman who's spent her entire adult life learning how to survive storms without asking the world to come save her. And when she finally explained why she never went after spousal support from Keith Urban, the truth wasn't petty, wasn't angry, wasn't even defensive. It was something way more haunting. A lifetime lesson that dependence always comes with a wound. This story doesn't kick off in Nashville, or on a red carpet, or inside a courtroom where lawyers argue over the price of love. It starts in silence. Those early years in Australia, when Nicole was a shy, red-haired girl growing faster than her confidence. She carried a quiet hunger to be seen, but also a deeper fear of being held too tight. Her father taught resilience. Her mother taught restraint. And somewhere between those two forces, Nicole learned a rule that would steer every relationship in her life. Stand tall, even when the ground is crumbling beneath you. She stepped into Hollywood with that rule carved into her bones. They called her fragile. They called her porcelain. They didn't clock the steel in her spine until it was way too late. She rose film after film, climbing heights that were supposed to make a woman grateful, obedient, careful. But fame didn't soften her, it sharpened her. She learned how men negotiate power. She learned how studios ration respect. She learned that vulnerability, in the wrong hands, turns into a cage. So when Nicole met Keith Urban, she didn't walk into that relationship looking for rescue. She didn't enter marriage chasing balance sheets or safety nets. She entered with something way more dangerous. Hope. Not the soft kind. Nah. The fragile, shaking hope of someone who'd already survived the fire once and was scared as hell of burning again. Because before Keith, there was the story the world never forgot. The implosion of her marriage to Tom Cruise. A decade under a microscope. A decade of scrutiny, rumors, silence, and wounds that were never allowed to breathe. When that marriage broke apart, Nicole was left holding a truth she'd carry for life. Money offered after heartbreak never feels like comfort. It feels like evidence. So by the time she married Keith Urban, the charming, self-made country star fighting his own shadows, Nicole wasn't the girl who needed to feel kept. She was the woman who knew that love built on emotional freedom lasts longer than love built on financial obligation. And then came the hardest chapter. While Keith spiraled into addiction, while tabloids sharpened their knives, while the world expected Nicole to walk, she stayed. Not out of weakness, but out of belief. The belief that two people in love are allowed to rebuild. She paid bills. She covered costs. She kept the family standing while he got help. She became the fortress because she chose to, not because some contract said she had to. So when people asked why she never demanded spousal support, Nicole finally answered with the simplicity of someone carrying scars nobody sees. Because I didn't need to be compensated for loving someone. But that line hides a darker current. One she'll never fully say out loud. Needing financial support would have meant she'd handed her power away again. And after surviving one of Hollywood's most dissected marriages, she swore she'd never let her worth be measured by a check, a settlement, or a courtroom equation. In Nicole's world, independence isn't a lifestyle choice. It's a survival code carved from ashes. The morning her revelation rippled through Hollywood, commentators rushed to call it dignified, noble, even romantic. But the truth behind her choice not to seek spousal support from Keith Urban isn't a fairy tale. It's a roadmap of scars that shaped how she loves, how she fights, and how she protects herself from ever becoming a shadow in someone else's life again. To get part 2 of her journey, you have to understand what independence means to a woman who learned it the hard way. Nicole wasn't raised in a dynasty. She didn't grow up rich. Her childhood was stitched together with her mother's sacrifices and her father's long hours. Money was never guaranteed. Stability was earned. Self-reliance became her first language. Hollywood didn't hand her power. She carved it out of rejection, out of auditions where she was told she was too tall, too pale, too ginger, too hard to cast. Every film she won was a fight. Every role was a gamble. She built her empire one bruise at a time. So by the time Keith Urban entered her orbit, she already knew the only thing she could truly rely on was the ground under her own feet. Their marriage wasn't built on fairy lights. It was built on confessions. Keith Urban, charming and magnetic on stage, carried storms inside. Addiction, insecurities, the pressure cooker of fame. Nicole didn't run from those storms. She walked straight into them, willingly, but she never handed herself over to them. When she drove him to rehab just months after their wedding, she didn't ask for sympathy. She didn't ask for reimbursement. She didn't ask for compensation. She asked him for honesty, for effort, for sobriety, for a marriage that wouldn't collapse under secrets. Keith fought his way back. Nicole stood beside him, not behind him, because standing behind someone was never her blueprint. In those dark nights when addiction threatened everything, she learned something deeper than love. She learned that saving someone isn't the same as owning them. And being strong for someone doesn't mean they owe you a lifetime of payback. That's why spousal support never even crossed her mind. To Nicole, taking money from a man she had chosen, loved, and fought for would have turned their history into a ledger. Love into transactions. Marriage into math. She refused to let the world reduce what they shared to a numbers game. But there was another layer most people never see. Nicole Kidman, for all her success, has always guarded a quiet fear. The fear of losing herself inside a man's world. She lived that once. She promised herself never again. With Keith Urban, she built a partnership where both could breathe, both could break, and both could rebuild without dumping all the weight on one person. She handled her money. He handled his. They met in the middle. So when their marriage shook under the spotlight, Nicole chose dignity over dependency. She wanted to walk through every storm knowing she survived on her own feet. That's why part 2 matters. It shows her choices weren't some Hollywood grace move, but the philosophy of a woman forged in private fire. She didn't refuse spousal support out of pride. She refused it because taking it would unravel the identity she spent a lifetime building. To Nicole, independence isn't protection. It's oxygen. There's a moment in every woman's life when she decides whether the past will define her or sharpen her. For Nicole Kidman, that moment didn't happen on a film set, at an awards show, or under flashing cameras. It came quietly, almost unseen, in the years after her marriage to Keith stabilized. After the chaos faded. After the storms thinned. When only truth was left. In that silence, Nicole finally understood why she could never seek spousal support. Not from Keith. Not from anyone. Because for the first time in decades, she could see herself clearly. Hollywood loves turning resilience into a spectacle. They loved Nicole most when she was breaking. They loved her standing alone on that red carpet after Tom Cruise. Her face pale, her smile shaking like glass. They loved the fragility. They loved the abandoned woman storyline. But they didn't love the woman she became after. A fortress, a quiet storm, someone who no longer needed permission to breathe. Part 3 of her journey starts with that shift. A woman unlearning self-sacrifice. Nicole grew up believing love and loyalty meant endurance. You stay, you fight, you give. And when Keith spiraled, she did all 3. But when the dust settled and he recovered, a scary realization hit her. She'd given so much she barely recognized herself in the mirror. Her identity had been shaped by who she stood beside. First Tom, then Keith, then motherhood. She was a star, yeah, but also a caretaker, a stabilizer, the quiet, strong one. She carried everyone else's storms. But who carried hers? That's the deeper reason money never entered the conversation. Nicole was no longer a woman who needed to take anything from anyone, especially from someone she once loved. She was rebuilding herself, reclaiming her shape, and money would have only messed with that process. People misunderstand powerful women all the time. They call independence arrogance. They call self-reliance distance. But Nicole's independence was born from survival. After her divorce from Tom Cruise, she saw how easily a woman's financial security can be used to control her story. Everything she built after that, including her production company Blossom Films, was her quiet rebellion. She'd never let a man or a relationship define her stability again. The wild part? Keith Urban never tried to. He never asked her to dim her light. But he had demons. And Nicole understood demons. Addiction doesn't die. It hides. It waits. She lived with that truth, not scared, just prepared. Part of her refusal to take spousal support came from that understanding. Love built on fragility has to be protected, not exploited. Money would have tainted it, twisted it, poisoned it. There was another truth she never said out loud, but lived every day. Nicole always expected she might walk alone someday. Not because she wanted to, but because life taught her nothing stays forever. She was left once. She survived. She grew. And she kept a small, private space inside herself reserved for solitude. That's why she built her life the way she did. 2 daughters, a home grounded in routine, a career she controlled, and a partnership with room to breathe. She wasn't planning an ending. She was protecting herself from devastation. And that's why tabloids dreaming up divorce scenarios sounded ridiculous to her. Spousal support? Nah. She didn't want Keith's money. She wanted peace. She wanted clarity. She wanted to know that if she ever had to walk alone again, she'd do it steady, graceful, on her own terms. But independence isn't the whole story. There was gratitude too. Nicole Kidman doesn't forget kindness. When Keith came back from rehab steadier, clearer, fighting his demons head-on, she saw something rare. A man choosing growth for himself. That mattered. Because love without growth rots. And Keith grew. He showed up. He healed. He rebuilt without hiding behind her fame. Nicole protected his dignity in return. Asking for spousal support would have turned their past into an accusation. She wasn't about that. In Hollywood, marriages often end with bitterness dressed up as legal language. But Nicole Kidman doesn't do symbolic punishment. If she ever walked away from Keith, she wanted to leave the same way she entered, empty-handed, open, and real. Part 3 goes deeper, way deeper. Nicole's philosophy of love sits at the core of it all. For her, love isn't ownership. Love isn't leverage. Love isn't a bank account you audit in court. Love, to Nicole, is seeing someone's brokenness and choosing to stay without asking for payback. Love is a risk. Yeah, a selfless, terrifying, soul-stripping risk. But it's a choice she makes fully aware of the storms it drags in with it. As she once hinted in an interview, the reason she doesn't seek compensation is simple. I don't love with conditions. People hear that and think it's romantic. It's not. It's tragic. It comes from a lifetime of loving people she couldn't keep. A father she lost. A husband she outgrew. Children she couldn't fully raise. A marriage that pulled her straight into the center of a global microscope. Love for Nicole Kidman isn't a sanctuary. It's a battlefield. And she walks through it with the grace of someone who's learned that survival takes lightness, not weight. Spousal support is weight. She lets it go. There's a moment in every long-lived love story when the storm doesn't come from the outside world, but from inside the house. For Nicole Kidman and Keith Urban, that storm arrived quietly, disguised as routine, disguised as distance, disguised as 2 careers pulling in opposite directions. Hollywood never shows these years. The world only sees red carpets, designer gowns, golden lighting turning 2 imperfect humans into a flawless silhouette. But behind closed doors, in those late hours when the kids slept and the cameras were gone, Nicole started feeling something she hadn't felt since her early 30s. The quiet ache of becoming invisible inside her own life. Keith Urban was touring non-stop, city after city, stage after stage. His art fueled by adrenaline. The man she once drove to rehab had become polished, sharp, controlled, running on a schedule that didn't belong to him, not to Nicole, not to their home, but to the machine of fame. And Nicole, whose career was entering its second golden era, found herself living in 2 parallel worlds. One woman holding the household together, another diving into emotionally brutal roles that left her wiped at night. This part of her journey never made headlines because it was too quiet, too intimate, too real. Nicole began to see her life splitting in 2. The public self, composed, luminous, graceful. And the private self, tired, craving stillness, unsure whether she was building something or slowly dissolving. That inner fracture is one of the deepest reasons she never sought spousal support. She didn't want her marriage, or its unraveling, to become another battlefield of obligations. If the day ever came, she wanted to leave clean, leave with integrity, leave without owning or being owned by anyone. Nicole has always been haunted by the fear of losing herself. That fear was born during the years she spent in a marriage where she felt smaller, quieter, erased piece by a life that was never fully hers. After her divorce from Tom Cruise, she fought her way back to autonomy. Through the fog of a decade where her voice was muted and her identity blurred, she swore that if she ever loved again, she'd never let herself be diminished. Not for a man, not for fame, not even for family. But love complicates vows. Keith brought warmth into her life. Music. Mess. A world far from Hollywood's polished edges. He made her feel human again. But he also carried shadows that needed constant care. Addiction doesn't just disappear when love walks in. It sleeps. It waits. Nicole lived with that truth, always aware that one day she might have to carry the weight alone again. And that's the heart of part 4. Nicole's refusal to seek spousal support isn't about forgiveness or pride. It's about survival learned over decades. She knows any foundation built on dependency collapses the moment the center gives way. Independence, to Nicole, isn't an attitude. It's a shelter she built long before Keith, and one she refused to tear down for marriage. During the years Keith was gone more than he was home, something inside Nicole settled into a truth she'd been avoiding. She wasn't the young woman who needed to be held together anymore. She was holding everything together, her daughters, her home, her career, with the calm of someone who'd already survived storms meant to break her. She didn't need reinforcement. She didn't need compensation. She needed peace. Hollywood mistook her silence for coldness. But silence, to Nicole Kidman, is dignity. She never corrected tabloids, never fed rumors, never weaponized her pain. Pain, to her, is private currency, something she carries alone, not something she cashes in for sympathy or money. She could have asked for security. She could have demanded stability. She could have pushed Keith to contribute more financially during his professional struggles. She didn't, because money isn't what she values. She values clarity, autonomy, control that keeps a woman's heart from becoming collateral damage in her own story. Nicole Kidman has always chosen roles that mirror her inner world. Women who suffer quietly. Women who endure. Women who walk through fire without screaming. Virginia Woolf. Grace Kelly. Celeste in Big Little Lies. Strength without spectacle. Survival without applause. That same truth carried her through the darkest moments of her marriage. There was a night, never publicized, never spoken, when Nicole sat alone in her Nashville home. Keith was on tour. The house was too quiet. Her daughters asleep. She realized she'd built a life where love existed, but wasn't always reachable. Love that felt like a warm echo instead of a steady flame. And in that moment, she understood something brutally simple. She could survive without him. Not because she wanted to, but because she'd built herself that strong. That realization didn't break her. It freed her. It told her she needed nothing from Keith Urban except honesty. Not money. Not promises. Not legal assurances. She'd already survived the kind of heartbreak that forces a woman to rebuild from ashes. She wasn't about to let dependency tear her down again. Refusing spousal support isn't just financial. It's a declaration of self. Nicole Kidman has spent her life reclaiming herself from systems, relationships, expectations, narratives that tried to define her worth. Taking money from Keith Urban, no matter the situation, would undo that reclamation. And still, there was tenderness. She celebrated his wins, supported him through relapses no one ever saw, shielded their daughters from instability, not as a martyr, but as a woman who believes love is strongest when it demands nothing and gives everything without conditions. The truth of part 4 is this. Nicole Kidman's independence isn't defiance. It's grief turned into armor, memory shaped into discipline, survival elevated into philosophy. That's why she walked through marriage and the possibility of separation without ever considering spousal support. Because she lives by one rule. What's given out of love should never be reclaimed through law. Every woman reaches a moment where she must choose between the life the world expects and the life her scars prepared her for. For Nicole Kidman, that moment didn't arrive in chaos, but in quiet years when her marriage looked golden from the outside. Radiant red carpets, warm interviews, perfect photos, harmony on display. But beneath it all was a woman facing a truth she'd long feared. Even in love, she stood alone. Hollywood loves illusion, the myth of the perfect couple. Two stars intertwined effortlessly. Nicole never bought it. She'd already paid the price once. She knew how devotion turns into dependence, how adoration turns into erasure. So in the middle years of her marriage, she began preparing, not for an ending she wanted, but one she understood was always possible. That understanding is the backbone of her refusal to seek spousal support. A woman who prepares her soul for loss doesn't build financial expectations. She builds emotional exits. Nicole Kidman doesn't wait for the ground to collapse before learning how to stand. She fortifies herself long before the storm hits, because she's already survived one that stripped her bare, and she swore she'd never let that happen again. Part 5 unfolds as Keith's career surged and Nicole's deepened. He was gone more than home. She was taking roles that demanded emotional blood. They loved each other, but their rhythms drifted. His world was loud, electric, stadium roaring. Hers was quiet, internal, shaped by scripts that dug up old wounds. That emotional mismatch created an isolation she didn't expect. She parented alone, managed a household on shifting schedules, carried emotional labor no headline ever acknowledged. And she didn't complain, not publicly, not privately. To Nicole, complaint is weakness. And weakness is a currency she doesn't spend. During those years, she built a structure, financial, emotional, that could survive collapse. Smart investments, a production company, a diversified identity. She became the architect of her own stability. Not because she expected Keith to fail, but because she never wanted to need him. Need, to Nicole Kidman, is dangerous. It's how a woman shrinks inside her own life. She'd lived that once. Never again. There's a moment, half memory, half feeling, when Nicole sat alone in her trailer between takes. The Big Little Lies script opened beside her. Celeste was a woman trapped between love and survival. And Nicole saw shadows of herself. Not the violence, not the danger, but the quiet erosion of loving someone who's often absent, distracted, lost inside himself. In that moment, she understood the truth that would guide her forward. Love can't be her anchor. She has to be her own. And anchors don't ask for support. As her daughters grew, Nicole poured herself into motherhood. Every recital, every bedtime story, every fragile moment. And quietly, she taught them by example. A woman doesn't need a man to stand tall. She was building the future while protecting the past. This philosophy explains everything. Spousal support isn't just money. It's narrative, power, an admission that a woman's stability depended on the man leaving her. Nicole Kidman rejects that, flat out. She'd rather walk away with nothing than let the world think she needed Keith Urban to survive. But there's another layer. Nicole still loves Keith. Not the firestorm love of youth, but the grounded, complicated love that survives storms. She loves the man who fought addiction, the father he became, the way he sings to their daughters, the way he tries, even when trying costs more than anyone sees. Love, to Nicole, isn't a debt. It's a daily choice. Seeking spousal support from a man she still respects would feel like betrayal, turning love into leverage. And Nicole Kidman doesn't believe in leverage. She believes in endings that are clean, quiet, dignified. If the marriage ever dissolves, and she accepts that all bonds are fragile, she wants to leave the way she entered. Open hands, not clenched fists. Grace, not anger. Love without calculations. Because love, to Nicole Kidman, isn't about what she gains. It's about what she can live with afterward. And she can't live with taking money from a man she once saved, once held, once believed in. She can't live with turning their history into a transaction. She can't live with the world twisting their story into imbalance or exploitation. So she chooses the harder road, the clean road. The road of a woman who knows independence is the only foundation that never crumbles. Every story reaches a point where truth stops being a reveal and becomes a reckoning. For Nicole Kidman, that reckoning came as she and Keith Urban stood on the edge of middle age. Successful, admired, celebrated, yet carrying unspoken distances that neither fully named. On the outside, it looked solid, like they'd weathered the worst of it. Rehab, rumors, absence, emotional turbulence. Yeah, all that. The public believed their marriage had survived its worst storms. But privately, Nicole felt something shift inside her. A subtle but irreversible settling of truth, the kind that hits quiet but hits hard. She could no longer pretend she needed Keith in order to be whole. That realization? Low-key life-changing. This quiet clarity is the deepest root of her refusal to seek spousal support. She had grown beyond the point where money could soothe her pain or validate her sacrifices. Cash couldn't fix what she'd already outgrown. Independence wasn't just her vibe anymore. It had become her moral compass. Part 6 begins in the slow erosion of closeness that happens in a lot of long marriages. Not through betrayal, not through blow-ups, but through 1,000 small choices made by two people whose lives ask more of them than they can give each other. Nicole woke early for film sets. Keith stayed up late after shows. She rehearsed lines in silence. He rehearsed chord progressions in noise. Two totally different rhythms. Their worlds, once tangled together, started moving like two planets orbiting the same space, but never quite touching. And still, in public, they showed up polished, holding each other with grace like pros. Nicole has always known how to perform serenity. Keith has always known how to perform charm. But underneath all that smoothness was an ache neither dared to say out loud. Love was there, but presence wasn't. And that gap? It hurts different. It was during this stretch that Nicole faced a truth she'd been running from her whole life. She had learned to love people more deeply than they could love her back. Her father, Tom Cruise, certain friends who drifted off once fame showed up. And now Keith, who loved her, yeah, but not in the way she needed, not with the emotional steadiness she'd built her whole life around. Nicole is a woman of depth. Keith is a man of motion. Depth and motion can exist side by side, sure, but they don't fuse without friction. And from that friction came her understanding of freedom. Freedom from expectations. Freedom from resentment. Freedom from financial entanglements that would lock her into a story she no longer believed. If their marriage ever ended, not in scandal, not in some messy explosion, but in a quiet, mutual recognition, Nicole wanted the ending to carry no bitterness, no negotiations, no back and forth, no drama. She wanted to leave with the same dignity she fought for in every chapter of her life. A clean exit. One that protected her daughters, her integrity, and even Keith himself. She knew what divorce could do to a man already scarred by addiction. She knew what public scrutiny could do to sobriety. She knew that taking money from him would seriously wound his pride. It could knock his whole balance off. And Nicole, for all her toughness, still had a soft spot for the man she once prayed for in hospital corridors, rehab lobbies, and the backseat of cars. After long nights of relapse and regret, she couldn't take from him something he'd spent his entire life building. Not because she owed him anything, but because she understood the fragility of recovery. She understood how expensive relapse is. And she understood the kind of man Keith Urban becomes when he loses stability. A man who falls hard, fast, and dangerously. But there was another truth, one Nicole barely admits, even to herself. Deep down, she has always believed that a woman should never profit from a man's brokenness. If she took money from Keith, it would feel like collecting a debt from the darkest chapter of their lives. She wouldn't do that. She wouldn't stain her hands with that memory. She healed him because she loved him, not because she expected payback. These thoughts haunted her during the nights she lay awake beside him. His breathing steady, his presence warm. And yet, this massive emotional silence stretched between them. She'd stare at the ceiling, asking herself the question she kept dodging. Was she still choosing this marriage, or just honoring it? And under that question sat the one that scared her the most. Did she need him anymore? The answer, whispered through years of self-examination, was no. But independence doesn't cancel love. It just changes its shape. Nicole still cherished the family they built. Still cherished the man who fought to be better. Still cherished the life they shielded from tabloid cruelty. But she had learned to cherish her own strength more. Part 6 reveals a side of Nicole Kidman most people never see. The strategist. The woman who plans her emotional survival like someone who knows how fast fame can flip into loneliness. She prepared herself financially, legally, emotionally, spiritually, for every possible outcome. Not because she expected an ending, but because she finally understood that loving someone doesn't mean tying your future to theirs. She would not link her worth to a man's income. She would not let her freedom depend on a courtroom ruling. She would not let a judge decide how much of her life belonged to her. Nicole Kidman isn't scared of endings. She's scared of losing herself inside them. So she made the decision long before the public even asked the question. If one day this marriage dissolves, she'll walk away with her dignity, her children, her body of work, her silence, and nothing else. No support, no compensation, no symbolic repayment for the storms she survived. Because the storms were hers. The survival was hers. The rebuilding was hers. And the freedom she forged from all that? That can't be bought or negotiated. There comes a chapter in every long, complicated love story when a woman finally understands the shape of her own soul. For Nicole Kidman, that chapter didn't arrive in the chaos of early fame, not in the implosion of her first marriage, Not in the nights spent waiting for Keith Urban to find his way back from addiction, but in the slow, steady dawn of maturity. She entered her 50s with a new language carved into her bones. One that spoke not of survival, but of sovereignty. Part 7 begins in this era of awakening. Nicole was no longer the girl searching for belonging. No longer the fragile young star drifting through Hollywood. No longer the wife who wrapped her identity around a man's ambition or a family's expectations. She had become a woman who understood the cost of every choice she made. And once you understand cost, you understand value. One value stood above everything else. Freedom. Freedom from dependence. Freedom from illusion. Freedom from any narrative that tried to define her worth through a marriage, past, present, or future. Nicole Kidman built her life on the discipline of standing alone. And she would not betray that discipline by seeking spousal support from Keith Urban, no matter how their story shifted. By the time she reached this clarity, the world had already cooked up its own versions of her life. Tabloids said she stayed for the kids. Others said it was image. Some claimed they were drifting apart. Others swore they were stronger than ever. None of that touched the truth. Because the truth of a marriage is never found in noise. It lives in silence. And inside that silence, Nicole found a deeper question, one she'd dodged for years. It wasn't, do I still love him? Love, she knew, isn't one flame. It changes. It flickers. It fades. It comes back. Love wasn't the issue. The real question, the one she whispered in dressing rooms, hotel beds, and long night flights, was quieter and sharper. Can I live the rest of my life without losing myself? That question shaped everything. Because Nicole knew exactly what it meant to lose herself. She'd lived it once, in a marriage that swallowed her identity. Routine by routine, year by year. She spent her 30s rebuilding a soul worn thin by compromises she barely remembered agreeing to. She wasn't doing that again. She refused to give away pieces of herself for the illusion of unity. She refused to walk into her 60s with regrets dressed up as devotion. To his credit, Keith never asked her to shrink. Never asked her to sacrifice. Never tried to control the shape of her life. But that wasn't the point. The point was that Nicole had changed. She now needed quiet more than chaos. Presence more than performance. Truth more than reassurance. And Keith, with his touring life, his cycles, his inner battles, sometimes just couldn't give her that. She didn't blame him. She accepted it. And acceptance is the final evolution of survival. Part 7 explores this evolution in its starkest truth. Nicole Kidman no longer defines love by attachment. She defines it by integrity. She believes any relationship should end the same way it began, freely. No debt. No bargaining. No turning feelings into math. That's why spousal support isn't just something she rejects. It's something that doesn't align with how she moves through the world. She doesn't love by contract. She doesn't separate by contract. She won't let a courtroom rewrite what her marriage meant. If she ever walks away from Keith Urban, she'll do it with a clean ledger and a clear conscience. Because there's a quiet but powerful part of Nicole that believes fate owes her nothing. Happiness owes her nothing. Love owes her nothing. What she has, she earned. What she lost, she accepted. What she endured, she transformed. In this chapter of her life, she realized something even deeper. She had become the woman she once wished she could be. A woman who could survive heartbreak. A woman who could sit with loneliness. A woman who could raise children gently while carrying her own wounds with discipline. A woman who could walk into any room, courtroom, studio, interview, living room, and never feel small again. That transformation is why she will never ask Keith Urban for money. Doing so would disrespect the journey that shaped her, the pain that strengthened her, the rebirth that defined her second half. Part 7 lands on one final truth. Nicole Kidman isn't afraid of endings. She's afraid of endings that force her to betray the woman she fought to become. So she chooses the harder road, the lonelier road, the dignified road, the road where she walks away unburdened. No financial chains, no emotional IOUs, no public explanations. Let the world guess. Let the headlines scream. Let the gossip spiral. She'll protect her truth the same way she always has. Through discipline. Independence is her legacy. Silence is her shield. Strength is her inheritance. And love, unpaid, uncompromised, unnegotiated, is the only kind she recognizes as real.